Welcome to Vision Heart Blog number 11, installment 11. I'm Richard Warner, welcome back. I'm taking my life in my hands here, doing this on a rainy day under some tree cover. Well, one does want to have these different backgrounds and so on, and I insisted on doing something with this kind of a background. It just happens to be rainy. So I hope we don't get into too much trouble here. Bit of a review before we continue, in case, excuse the occasional thunderclap here. The whole blog's purpose is to move, the idea is to move towards a quantum culture. What does a quantum culture mean? Basically, the way we see things, the way we look at things, the way we judge things, the way laws are set up, the way religions are set up, they've all grown into each other and come to a certain point where they all coalesce together to create a particular, what we would call Western worldview. That Western worldview is typified, and this is very oversimplified, is typified by pretty much lately materiality, materialist philosophy, which means basically this materiality, this body, this world, these rocks, trees, all the elements is all there is. And each one of those things is very separate. I am certainly not part of this house or the leaves or the sky. They are not part of me. This camera is not part of you. These are all distinct and irreconcilably separate things. This creates a certain number of things that happens in the mind. Psychologically, this has created a cultural mind, a cultural mindset that enables us to do whatever we want to the world, to feel that there's no connection between that animal that we kill for food or that environment that we destroy, those other people that we manipulate or subjugate. They have no connection to us. There's no feeling of empathy. There was a book written years ago by a scientist called Morris Berman. The book was called The Re-enchantment of the Universe. In his book, he talked about a pre-Western, which is actually pre-Greek, experience of the world as being participatory, where human beings, what some would call in a shamanic relationship, and some would call a primitive relationship to the universe, interacted with the world around them, and they saw themselves as not separate at all. That everything that they thought, felt, did, and how they reacted had an impact on the universe, and that had an impact back on them. So there was a symbiotic relationship with reality and so on. So those beings, those early humans, the pre-Western, pre-Greek cultures, participated in the universe around them. Here, now, in this culture, we are very separate. We are very, very separate. I have no empathy, in many cases, with the person. I don't feel directly what's happening to the person that's close to me, no matter how close they are to me. We seem to be very, very separate. We seem to be extremely apart from everything around us. This creates a kind of psychological desperation, and that desperation plays itself out in behaviors such as addiction, obsession, many things where we try in so many different ways to reach out, to make contact with us. There's something wrong about this because there's a kind of psychosis, not a psychosis, there's an illness, a lack, something wrong, and we know it. We know it intuitively. We know intuitively that something is wrong. It doesn't sit right. It doesn't feel right. We've been told to ignore feelings, and we've become a very logocentric culture, a very mindset culture, a culture that is up in the head. And in order for us to move forward, so that we're not destroying everything around us because we feel no empathy with anything around us, we need to move back into some form of participatory consciousness. But that doesn't mean going backward. That means going forward. I think of the old synthesis, antithesis, synthesis, where something comes forward, exists for a while, and then its antithesis or its opposite comes up. And then when those two clash and become immovable, out of that comes the third, which is the new synthesis, and so on, which then becomes, and so on. And this comes back into Joseph Chilton Peart's idea that the cosmic egg, our egg, our sphere of concept that surrounds us, that creates our universe, is something that has to be broken down over and over and over again in this cyclic reopening, moving forward, and so on. It is not a situation where one is continuing, closing and opening in the same position all the time. It's a movement forward. So in order to do this, we need to do this consciously. And the more consciously we move forward, it means understanding our past. It means understanding what we're actually doing right now. And the easiest way to do this is, it sounds like an overwhelming prospect, but as I get wetter and wetter here, but I'm going to continue this. It is something that we can do each individually, and this is the thrust of the whole Vision Art project, is to, through art, through videos, through my blog, which is now up on WordPress, we're going to be looking at many different ways that each individual human can take on the quantum view, the quantum aspect. It is not so far removed a science that one has to have a degree in mathematics and physics to be able to understand this. This is where I'm going with this, and this is where I think my role is to see if I can maybe contribute towards a movement towards that quantum culture. It's going to be necessary for us in this global world, global culture, to do that. If we don't, we're going to be in really big trouble. Thunderclap, thank you. So, one of the ways that I thought was a possible option, is meditation. I brought that forward and offered that as a way because the first place to start really with our minds is to understand our minds, to get a sense of our minds. We have these things called minds that are, excuse me, that are I'm really getting quite wet. They're really out of control. They haven't been trained. They haven't been guided. We're brought into this world and given these minds. We're trained how to use them in a certain type of way, which is very utilitarian. And then we go with these things and we make all kinds of mistakes. And we bumble and crash and tumble our way through this world and so on. And I don't know how much consciousness, awareness of what we're doing plays into it. For most of us, it doesn't. We think we're conscious, we're aware, I see you, you see me, I interact with the world and so on. But that's very, very basic. That's the bottom of the old Maslow Pyramid. Most of us are in survival mode. There's this one leaf that keeps dripping in my eye. Sorry. The bottom of the Maslow Pyramid, the old Maslow Pyramid, most people are at the bottom level. There's more of them. The base of the pyramid is wider than the peak. The base of the pyramid is all about basic survival. This ties in also, interestingly enough, with the human chakras. So the base is survival. And we move up the pyramid in more refined levels of consciousness until we have a very refined consciousness with a very small peak, a very few number of people at the top. And the interesting thing is, when you're at one level, you can understand the level below you because where you are at that point is where you've come from, but you can't understand the level above you. You haven't gone there yet. So when trying to explain concepts that are above people to people who maybe haven't gone there yet, it's a very difficult process. So what you have to do is relate to them on the level that they're at and gradually move that experience up. But that's up to each individual. One can only give instructions, one can only offer help, and then it's really up to that individual. But we're seeing now more and more, I think, an unprecedented number of people who are asking a lot of questions, a lot of big questions and so on. I think we've reached kind of a critical mass now where there's enough education, there's enough intelligence, there's enough awareness, and the access to the internet is increasing the amount of factual availability. I won't say knowledge, or I certainly won't say wisdom. And because there's a mass degree of education and also a much wider, more widespread use of communication, where now so many things can't hide anymore because everybody's talking. The internet is a fabulous place. The upside of the internet is a fabulous place where ideas are being exchanged back and forth so fast, so rapidly, that it's hard to keep track. The amount of information that we have gained in 1 year is probably 1,000 times greater than what it was 5 years ago. The curve now is like, it's straight up. And it's going up so fast, it's going to be incomprehensible. In 10 years' time, we couldn't even imagine what life is going to be like 10 years from now. Hopefully it will be different. So with all of this happening, it seems with a massive amount of information, a massive amount of communication, the interconnection of cultures, economies, nations, nation states, and so on, economic unions, whether they're breaking down or not, is crying out for an understanding of interpenetrability, shall we say, of our actions, the interconnection, the interrelatedness of our actions. If we're interacting with each other, if we're interconnecting with each other, if, similar to a quantum level, if what happens over here is almost instantly affected over here, there is a quantum analogy. What's going to happen is eventually those things will be immediate. Information that appears here is going to be appearing over here instantly. The very everyday aspects of our lives, the internet, interchangeability and interconnection of economies and politics, so on, is going to force us, whether we choose it or not consciously, it's going to force us into a quantum consciousness. To do that, we each need to make that decision to do that. Now, those that can see it, they will be the first. It's an interesting number I heard in that in groups of people, it only takes 1.5% of that population to make a conscious shift, to shift into a new paradigm. That shift from those 1.5% actually shifts everybody else. It's kind of reaches a critical mass, gets into the old 100th monkey where you get so many people thinking a certain way, and then eventually it becomes very common. So it's going to begin with those who are conscious and those who are looking to move forward in a conscious way. So we're going to get into some other things in the future. I thought a recap here was good, and what we're doing and why we're doing it and where we're going to be moving forward with. I thank you very much for watching, and I think I'm going to go home and get dry now. Thanks. Cheers.